This is an advanced English discussion video, and I will talk informally about the novel 1984. So if you've read it or if you haven't read it, it's a very interesting novel, and it's set in a fictional world and written in 1948 but set in 1984. So the writer has imagined what would happen in an imaginary world situation, and the global system is very different to the way it was then. I read this novel when I was 18, so quite a few years ago, but I read it for an English literature A-level course, so I studied it a little bit and analysed some of the themes which are in the novel. Let me begin by telling you a little bit about what happens and the characters, and then we will discuss a little bit about what it means and the political and moral signification of it. So there are two main characters. Winston Smith, he's about 40 years old and he works in the media, and he finds that he is fabricating history on a daily basis, and the world he lives in is controlled by a central government which is constantly telling him what to do and what to think, and he has to program everyone else through technology. And it's called they have telescreens in those days, but it's very similar to the modern prevalence of the internet, of screens, TVs, smart TVs, tablets, iPhones, and the constant propaganda that's happening today in this time. There's another character, Julia. So Winston and Julia have a love relationship in the story, and if I summarize it very quickly, their love is destroyed by the central government, which is called nothing more than Big Brother. So Big Brother is basically a dictator and has its instrument of oppression and spying on all of the people living in his city and in the rest of the world. So what happens to Julia and Winston? Winston decides to be a rebel, and he decides to start writing his own personal thoughts in a journal, which he does in the corner of his bedroom, away from all of the telescreens, the cameras, which are constantly watching. But he later on makes a mistake and falls victim to, maybe it's a sting operation by Big Brother, and they reel him in, they take him in, they charge him, they put him on trial. Or they don't even put him on trial. There's no such thing as justice. They merely torture him and put a rat trapped in a cage either against his chest or against his face, and force him to betray Julia. So they make him beg that they save him and put the rat on Julia instead, and kill her instead of him. The novel ends really horrible. I don't know if I should tell you what happens, but maybe I'll keep that in case you haven't read it. I'd like to discuss what is the political and moral meaning of this novel, 1984. So the way I interpret it is that the author isn't really writing a novel about characters or love or anything like that. His primary interest, the author is George Orwell, and he was a very analytical political writer in the 1930s and 40s. He believed in freedom, and that was so if I get back to the story, the political dimension is that what he describes is the individual. The individual is signified by the character, Winston Smith and Julia, and the state. And the state is the government, signified by Big Brother and the party. So what is described in the novel is that there is a danger of the state and the government taking too much control over people's lives. And the way I see it is that there's a loss of personal liberty, a loss of privacy, and that we need to guard against giving over our freedoms to government institutions, to the state, and allowing them to control and to spy on us. And so we can see many parallels with what was written in 1948, a novel which George Orwell imagined could be a world in 1984, and now in 2017 we can see that with the NSA in the United States, with the WikiLeaks, with MI6, and all the spying that's going on, with the spread of cameras in every nook and cranny of every home. You may think it's turned off, but Mark Zuckerberg, he puts a little piece of aluminium foil in front of his camera. So if he's doing that, what does that say? What does he know that we don't know? Is the government spying on us? Do you think? You don't feel it right now. Are you being brainwashed by propaganda every second of every day? How free do you feel in your current society? How much do you trust the government when it tells you statistics and numbers when it tells you these are the employment figures, these are the numbers for GDP, and something very interesting in that book, there are terrorists who are paraded on the telescreens. Emmanuel Goldstein. Terrorists. Written in 1948. Enemies of the state. People who commit acts and violence against the state, who are captured and executed without trial. And the 2 minutes hate. Everyone joins together to hate the image of the enemy in almost a religious service. How much does that resemble the news today? If you are in the US, Russia is the enemy, and Putin is the scary bogeyman. And if you were in Russia, obviously everything's turned around, and the enemy is the US, or some other enemy, whether it's terrorists somewhere in the Middle East, Eurasia, Oceania, Africa, and London. Winston Smith lives in London, and it's called Airstrip 1 in the book, which is the idea that the US has possession of the UK, and it's nothing more than a landing strip for its military. So I'd like to finish my little analysis with a look at what does it mean when Winston Smith betrays Julia in the torture chamber of the Ministry of Truth. What does it mean when he betrays her? He asks them to save himself and to put the rats on her face. To me, I had a thought earlier about this scene, and I interpret that as the way modern political system works. It's not about human nature, it's not about love, it's not about weakness, but rather about the way the state, symbolized by Big Brother, forces the individual with torture and brainwashing in order to hate someone that he should really love. So if you take away the state, if you take away the government, Winston and Julia may never have betrayed each other, and they might have had a happy romantic ending, possibly. Right, so this is my little explanation and interpretation of the novel 1984. If you have read it, I'd like you to write down some of your thoughts, and your brainstorm about it. How do you interpret it? And think about the country where you live. Think about the technology you have. Think about the government and how invasive and how free is your society. Write down some of your thoughts. Think about the characters. Since I read this novel a long time ago, perhaps there's something that I've missed and that you can mention in your discussion. So write down a few lines, add it to the comment section of this video, and hopefully we'll have some interesting thoughts on the novel 1984. And if you haven't read it, go and read it, or you can still comment and give your thoughts about what you think, whether you would like to read the novel or not. Okay, thank you and goodbye.